Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma, and today I will be discussing the United States and its Florida migrant workers in the 1940s. In this presentation, I will also discuss the migrant workers' impact on other topics in the same time period as well. In this picture, there are 4 African Americans loading their car with luggage, 2 female and 2 male. When researching this picture, I found that it was taken in the 1940s and that they are migrating to New Jersey to harvest potatoes. More than likely, they are migrating from the south and through the Atlantic coast migration route, as this route was common in the Second Great Migration. So today I will be discussing the states of New Jersey and Florida, as well as the Dust Bowl and the southern United States, and how these relate to various topics such as the Great Depression in the U.S., the migrant workers of the 1940s, and modern agriculture around this time period. But before I begin, I have created a timeline to help explain how these regions and topics relate. So to start, in the late 1800s, the popularity of Florida to farmers in the nearby states increases. Next, the draining of the Everglades was accomplished in the early 1900s and was then deemed open. The early 1930s included a Dust Bowl, which reached from Texas to Nebraska and all throughout the Southern Plains. Next, with the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, was the Great Depression that swept the entire United States, as the economy plummeted after a huge boom in the 1920s. World War II begins in 1939, which opens many opportunities for migrant farm workers. In the 1940s, the South's farm equipment has progressed, which means profits for the sharecroppers, but it also means obsolete migrant workers. Around the same time, the era of pesticides begins to take off and revolutionizes agriculture permanently. Also in the 1940s, the Second Great Migration occurred, which included over 5 million African Americans. So to start from the very beginning, let's talk about the popularity of Florida in the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, farmers in nearby southern states moved to Florida. Florida was nicknamed the Sunshine State. Farmers, migrants, and the few 1% moved to Florida for their sunny climate. Not only was the climate a large appeal, but also the array of crops that farmers could grow due to its fertile soil. They would be able to raise livestock, citrus, and year-round crops without having to worry about the northern weather, and along with earning even larger profits than they would have back home, since the land in Florida was much cheaper. Sharecrop owners would not only be able to grow more crops and livestock with cheaper rates, but also the railroads allowed their products to be shipped to northern markets. These railroads followed a similar path of the migration throughout the Atlantic coast. The popularity of Florida increased exponentially after the drainage of the Everglades was completed in the 1920s, as more farmland became available, urban land was built, and this attracted migrant workers and U.S. citizens throughout the country. So jump ahead a little bit, the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was a time period where the Dust Bowl ruled the Southern Plains. There was an ongoing drought, along with dust storms, and this led to wind erosion. Crops and livestock died, and hundreds of people were displaced. So these migrants were forced to move. As a result of climate and the immigration, livestock, produce, and wages plummeted as more than 500,000 left this region. Sharecroppers were no longer able to pay their workers the amount they could before. Before, the average wage was approximately 35 cents an hour, and then it was cut to 14 cents an hour, if they were ever paid. Their living conditions were poor at best, with lack of plumbing, nutritional food, and their sleeping arrangements. Migrant workers were forced to sleep next to makeshift toilets, resulting in spreading of diseases and sickness. Workers who had enough strength to leave the Dust Bowl left and either moved north or south. Many who moved south went to Florida, as the border was easier to maneuver than others, and some of the agriculture was year-round. Borders in Florida and in other states were created since those in lower classes kept trying to get into the state. But Florida did not want to influx their economy as they were already saturated with workers. They were oversaturated with workers so much in Florida that it was about double the amount that they needed, so it was quite difficult for the economy to adjust to these amount of workers. So, which is one of the reasons why it was created, these borders. Next, along with the Dust Bowl, was the Great Depression of the United States, which was also in the 1930s. The Great Depression in the 1930s, as many know, led to low economic wages, extremely high unemployment rates, and overall a very, very low morale. In this time period, it was crucial that migrant families stuck together. Depending on the types of jobs available, mothers and children stayed at their makeshift homes while the fathers went to work in fields or in canneries, textiles, etc., wherever they could really find work. Depending on the situation, many mothers and children worked as well in order to increase their income. And when traveling to other states to find work, many families took refuge in their cars. Their homes and land were foreclosed as they were forced to live in their cars. The Dust Bowl and Great Depression weren't the only reasons that these migrant workers moved, but also the new era of pesticides and farm equipment was fast approaching. And this brings us to the 1940s, the new era of pesticides. So in this time period, Long Island, which is very close to New Jersey, about an hour or two drive depending on the traffic, found an abundance of calcium arsenate, which kills potato nettles, a type of bug. Potato nettles are harmful to the growth of potatoes and could damage the farmer's product. Soon after the discovery, this quickly became one of the first known pesticides, and calcium arsenate spread very quickly. So starting in the 1940s and throughout the 1950s, chemical pesticides and fertilizers were improved as these bugs and insects kept mutating to these. These pesticides and fertilizers proved to increase the north growth production exponentially. Some call these pesticides a weapon, since they not only harm the threats to the crops, such as potato nettles, but also the consumers. To be fair, at the time, these farmers did not know this, but they did know that it proved to be a great opportunity for the farm workers as well as the farmers' product that they produced each day. In the winter, migrant workers moved to the south towards Florida, since most of the crops in the north did not grow in the winter. And in the summer, these workers moved north up to New Jersey and surrounding states. Some workers even stayed up in the north, in New Jersey, since there was a huge potato surge. These potatoes grew year-round, and with the widespread use of pesticides, it was even easier for the farmers to grow. Not only were the potatoes growing year-round and versatile, but also the wages were much, much higher. So keep in mind, the U.S. is slowly recovering from the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the 1940s. So these wages were a significant improvement. Workers, such as in this picture, traveled up the Atlantic coast in their cars together as a family to pick potatoes in New Jersey. On average, they were given 6 cents for every burlap sack filled. This was a huge improvement from 14 cents today, and if they ever got paid, which sometimes they were never paid. And this does depend on the location. Before, these workers lived in horrible conditions, but with the money they were earning from the potatoes, they were able to afford slightly better food, clothing, even shelter. Some were able to get out of their cars and moved into slightly improved homes. African Americans were appealed to not only the wages and guaranteed work year-round, but also the tolerance of African Americans up north. Many others besides these 4 African Americans in this picture were enticed, and then a new migration period started. This is known as the Second Great Migration, and this was also along with the help of modern farm equipment in the 1940s. Over 5 million African Americans moved out of the South during this migration period. For one, it was economic reasons. In a sharecropping system, it was impossible for them to climb up the ladder in the agricultural field. They were stuck with the jobs meant for unskilled workers. Both domestic and labor jobs in these plantations had harsh conditions as well as poor quality living conditions. Their economic status had not improved since slavery became illegal, but plantation owners were able to find loopholes in the laws preventing slavery. In the 1940s, Jim Crow laws were well underway and established, and because of this, African Americans still felt unsafe in the South. They figured, at least socially, they would be more tolerant up in the North. So in the 1930s and 1940s, along with the era of pesticides, was the modernization of farm equipment. Farm equipment improved significantly. Cotton pickers and other equipment became mechanical. This improved the amount of product that was produced, and the sharecrop owners were able to eliminate any cost in housing or other necessities for migrant workers, as this equipment was much more efficient than a group of migrant workers. So they were able to fire them, in a sense, if they ever did get paid. However, this meant that workers were now considered obsolete, and they were never able to learn any other skills, as they were placed in unskilled positions, meaning that they were never able to improve on their skills or any skills that they would attain for the real world or had any interest in. So they were displaced by equipment, and they could never get hired. So, because they were never able to learn any other skills, this made it difficult for them to find any other job in the South, as well as another disadvantage being that they were African Americans. So these two together, having no job experience besides working in the field, and they were African Americans, they were never able to find jobs. So millions of African American workers moved out of the South and dispersed. Some went to the West in order to completely get out of agriculture and settle into an urban lifestyle, or they moved north. Those who moved north found potatoes, and many African Americans surprisingly found urban jobs as well. They earned a steady income, but others found different jobs, such as textiles, factories, canneries. And they found different jobs because World War II was in full force in the United States. Factories and textiles were used solely for the war. And because of this war, this pulled America out of its slump. Florida migrant workers in the 1940s was only the beginning of a new America. Farmers moved, pesticides and fertilizers grew, and migrants dispersed. Throughout the turmoil, their citizens made it through, and because of them, things will never be the same. We should thank these workers and farmers every day. They provide us food and a steady income. Overall, we would be nothing. We wouldn't have food, we wouldn't have a steady income. We wouldn't be able to survive without them. So please support your local farm workers and migrant workers. So thank you for listening. My name is Emma Rombold, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.